Hi everybody, and this is part 5 in our 6-part video series on parsing. This is in regards to attributes and rewrites. So the first thing that I actually want to talk about in regards to attributes is how simple they actually are and why we actually use them. So despite the fact that they are a super simple concept and it's literally just attaching data to different log lines, it's important to actually plan out the attributes that your company is going to be using and come to the determination of a few of them that you are going to use across your company. For instance, perhaps you have an org attribute. Every log line that comes from a particular org, you are probably going to want to tag with that. Another example of that could be prod versus staging versus QA servers. Tagging log lines that are coming from each of those is a really good thing to do. So let's say you have those two particular tags, then you could narrow things down on whether it came from a QA server and which org it actually came from. There are a lot of things that you can actually do. You could tag things by team, by different server, by data centers. The point is having a disciplined practice around how you tag your log lines is the number one piece to this. The ability to tag them is what I'm going to teach you in this video, but I just want to reiterate how important it is to have some standardization around how you actually tag things. So let's take a look back at some of the examples that we were talking about before, and let's build on them. So first, let's go back to the documentation, and the first thing that we're going to talk about are attributes. So if we go to the section tagging line formats, it's going to talk about attributes. And attributes are inherently super simple. What it is basically attaching static data to log lines, basically. So if we just take the example that we have in the documentation, so if we take the example we have in the documentation, and if we go back to a previous example that we were working with, and we test here, just making sure it's working. So what we have here is an access log. We have basically two dissimilar formats that are coming in. So we have the access log here, and we have the we have this other random log that's coming in here. And then maybe let's say they're interlaced like that. So basically random messages coming in from two dissimilar formats. And maybe we want to identify when something's an access log, and we want to identify when it's something else. So this is a good way for us, this is a good time for us to actually use attributes. So in this case, now that we tested, we can see that format 1 is true and format 2 is true here. So it's basically matching format 1 and format 2. And then here, it's matching format 3. So some things that we can do, we can call this one access log maybe. I'll just call that, I don't know, kernel. And if we press test here, then we've renamed the ID, so it's going to be access log is true. Access log is true. And then the kernel log is going to say that it's true there. But if you want to bring other values in, just random strings, you can also do that using an attribute. So let's take that example that we took before. So let's take this, and we're just going to paste this in here. So this is a good time to talk about where these can actually go. So you could tag each format if you wanted to with whatever data you needed. So let's just add one to each one of these. One other thing you could do is you could globally tag something. So you can tag it outside of the formats here, and it's going to attach that basically to every single log line coming into Scalar, or into this, every single log line coming into this parser. So assuming I didn't paste a bug, we can see actually what happened. Yeah. And let's actually give this a little bit more information. So we can call this type. We'll call this one type. Call this an access log, this one access log. Call that kernel. And then we can leave phase there. And let's call this data set. I'll just call that data. And if I test, what we should see is we have a data set data for every single line globally. The other thing that we're going to see is we're going to have a type value here now. So this one is an access log, this one's an access log, and then the other formats that are coming in, this one's going to be a kernel log. Yeah, so that's kind of how those work. So now we're able to use one parser to tag dissimilar formats. My general recommendation, even though this is super useful and pretty common, is to try to bring in as similar a format as you can into parsers, because you could define as many parsers as you need. That it's not a bad idea to bring all of maybe your access logs into an access log parser, all of your error logs into an error log parser, all your JSON logs into a JSON log parser. So that's generally accepted, but sometimes you really can't get away from this, and it happens a lot. And that's just one use case for using attributes. You can use attributes to basically tag all of your lines with static data. It gets super useful as we build out more and more parsers. So those are attributes. The next thing that I want to take a look at are rewrites. So for instance, rewriting, rewriting is going to allow you to basically do that. It's going to allow you to rewrite something that was previously parsed or that was already parsed within that same message. So that'll make sense in a second when we actually get into it. So let's go to our documentation and let's go to rewrites. And yeah, here we go. So we have rewrites here, and let's use an example that we used earlier. And actually, we can use this example. So before we use this example, let's set it up in a way where it'll actually be useful. So let's take a look at these access log parsers, or these access log formats. And what we have here is a URI. We have some options within parsing to within like the parsing syntax to actually parse various types of data. One of which is a URI path. Here, and we can see within the documentation. We just define this parse function, and then there's some pre-built ones here. If we paste this here for our URI, we're just going to copy that example exactly. And let's see what this actually does. So if I paste this in, we should have URI path here. And what this actually does is it's going to parse the parameters out of a URL basically. So let's add a parameter. So let's just do something like that. Some URL, I believe it handles encoding and not encoding if I'm not mistaken. And if I do that, then here we go. So yeah, so now you can see kind of how this worked. And I don't know if that's valid URI syntax. So let's just do foobar. Yep, so it's basically parsing all of the parameters out of this URI here. So we have A, B, foo, and then we have the full path here. So that's what that is doing. And one other thing to note is that the prefix that we see here, like URA, URIB, that prefix is determined by the variable name basically. So I could actually keep that blank if I wanted to. And if I press test again, it's going to remove that prefix. So yep, so there we go. So now we just have path, which is home, and then we have foo bar, and then A and B. And we're going to get more into how to really do this when we get into the next section, which is parsing structured data. We're going to take a deep dive into kind of how to do more of this, but this is a really simple example of how how you could parse a URL. So I talk about that because the next piece is rewriting, and this would be a prime use case for actually rewriting. So let's take this here. Let's say you have like some sort of ID coming in. And let's say, so this PKID, let's say that variable, so maybe this value is useful to you. Maybe this is like a global ID that your team uses, but the parser is calling it PKID because that's what the key is. This is where a rewrite rule comes into play. So if I run this, we have this PKID, but let's say all your other parsers and all your other logs are calling this particular ID like global ID maybe. This is where we are able to change that. So the way that we do that is, let's just go back here and let's take this rewrite stanza. And then we're going to paste that in our format here. So basically, yeah, so we're going to define a rewrite rule, and we could have n number of rewrite rules here. And it's going to take an input variable. So that input variable is going to be PKID, or whatever the field name is. The output, so let's say your whole company calls that global ID. Something like that. And then this is going to be a regular expression to match sections of the line if you wanted. And then this is going to be basically a replace expression. So one thing that we can do here is just grab everything. And then we're going to take group 0. So it actually does handle groups as well. So let's just test that. And then what we can see now is we have a global ID that's actually coming in. So now that will be grouped with all of the other global IDs that are in your account, and that's a prime use case for how something like this would actually work. If we get a little bit more in depth into this, this is actually a regular expression. So let's do single let's do 3 digits maybe. And then we're going to call that group 1. And if you're unaware of kind of what I'm doing here, I recommend taking a look at the regular expression video. There's some useful resources there for you as well. And then we're going to do basically n number. So this is doing 3 digits, and then immediately and calling and putting that in a group. And then immediately after that, it's going to take the remaining amount of digits and it's going to put that into a group. So this is group 1, and then this is group 2. So if I do group 1 and then I do group 2, it should grab everything. So there should be no change in global ID. Let's say I take group 2 away. It should just grab group 1, which is 3 digits. And it did. So there's global ID and it's just pulling 3 digits. So that's kind of how the regular expressions work here. And it gives you quite a bit of control on how those also work. You could also loop it as well. So if you wanted to replace all and you set that to true, you can replace all instances of the match. All you have to do is add that replace all argument. So those are attributes and rewrites, and I hope to see you in the next episode where we talk about structured data. This is going to be a 2-part series, or a 2-parter, because structured data is really, I guess, the crux of parsing. That's where you can build really powerful parsers that are relatively simple to maintain because you're not defining everything specifically or statically as we have over the last few videos. So things are going to work similar to kind of how we were parsing this URI, but we can do that with whatever pattern that we want. We can do JSON, we can do XML, we can do really complicated structured JSON, and in the next series or the next video, I'm going to teach you how to do so. So stay tuned, and hope to see you next time. Thanks.